Steve Mnuchin went on CNBC to talk about the things that Musk and DOGE have been uncovering as of late. DOGE, I know that DOGE gets a lot of hate from like the Blue and On people or whatever, but I think DOGE is pretty cool. DOGE is pretty cool. I do wish that there was like a little bit more like transparency or proof, because a lot of people are like, oh, that line item you're cutting doesn't even exist. And I'm like, it's kind of a wacky thing to make up. And like, who are your script writers? Why would you write something so unbelievable rather than writing something that's actually believable if you're going to make up a lie like this? I don't see the argument for saying that DOGE is literally just making up things as part of its cuts. I don't see that. But yeah, it's like, bro, like, why are we spending millions of dollars on like Arabic Sesame Street? Like, we don't need to do that. Let HBO pay for that if they want to.
There was a special guest joining David in Miami. Let's get to David.
Hello, we'd like to hear
Carl, thank you. Yeah, I think at this point it's fair to say that former Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin's become a friend of the show, right? We can call you that now?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Stopping by here, and good to have you. Carl and Jim were just talking about DOGE. I'd love to start there and get your sense, both given the 4 years, obviously, you spent running the Treasury Department. What is your sense as to the level of waste and fraud, so to speak, broadly speaking, in the U.S. government?
Well, I think the good news is Elon's group is uncovering a lot of things that I think we're all somewhat surprised by. I think that as it relates to Treasury, Treasury's job is really a giant payment processor to send out the payments, and they get certifications from the other agencies. I mean, the big one that everybody's talking about is obviously, and President Trump talked about yesterday, is these really old people apparently getting Social Security checks.
Do you really buy that? I mean, is it really possible they've missed millions of people who are over the age of 100? Come on.
It's hard to believe. I would hope that they check that quick.
Why is that hard to believe? The idea that like nobody is doing a Social Security fraud, or Social Security fraud is not something being done at a large scale, it's like that would I don't know, you guys trust the government too much.
Yes.
And audit whether it's a data issue, because if it's not, it's pretty astonishing.
It would have to, I mean, it would put into question everything, and then certainly embolden the effort if that was true. But I guess I find it hard to imagine that could possibly be true, because then it would mean they're just terrible at doing their job entirely, wouldn't it?
Well, so I mean, they have the data. I think they've even showed the spreadsheet that they received. So what's the counter argument? Is the spreadsheet completely made up? Are they making up these Excel spreadsheets for fun? Or is the internal data wrong? And if the internal data is wrong, then how do they even know that this level of fraud is not happening?
It seems like an easy thing that someone checked. You know, I recall I had a big title as managing trust.
I think kind of the point is that they're not checking, right?
Like an easy thing that someone checked. You know, I recall I had a big title as managing trustee of Social Security, and you know, I was always very focused on issuing new types of Social Security cards. I still think it's crazy that Social Security issues paper cards in the days of electronic ID. So there's definitely a lot of things to do there.
Yeah, certainly there's been a lot of attention as well given to the access that the DOGE team has had to various systems, whether it be Social Security or Treasury. Scott Bessent, obviously the Treasury Secretary, now allowing that. Are you comfortable with Musk and team having that kind of access to Treasury?
Well, my understanding of what Scott said is that you have two people that have access to read information and not write information. If that's the case, it's completely appropriate. They're just looking at the information. By the way, a lot of this information feeds into public systems anyway.
The way that people are freaking out and being like, oh no, government employees are going to be able to see my Social Security number is like absolutely ridiculous.
Right. Stephen, we've had an ongoing dialogue with you about TikTok. It's something, obviously, that you very publicly stated your interest in quite some time ago, if there was an opportunity. The clock clock's ticking here on the ban actually coming into effect, I guess, again. Where do things stand? Is there a deal being worked on?
Well, we're having conversations with some of the people behind the scenes, and I'm hopeful that the president and vice president who's working on this will be able to reach a deal. I mean, I've always said the most probable way to reach a deal, have U.S. investors invest into the company, have ByteDance spin it off so the existing U.S. investors can stay in the business, dilute the Chinese ownership down to 20%, which is required by the law, and make sure that the technology is disentangled. Now, that part of it may take some time, but I think if there's a deal, that's the most likely route.
Do you feel like progress is actually being made, and or where is is it ultimately going to just be something that the president decides one day?
I think he wants to save it, so I'm hopeful that he comes up with a solution that works for national security issues and that the Chinese sign off on.
I mean, all that has to be done is that the company needs to divest from China. You would think that wouldn't even be that hard to do. Even if I'm from China's perspective, I'd be like, bro, there are so many communists in America. Just find a rich communist and have them buy TikTok for me. Like, is that so hard? Is that so hard? I will say, and I have said this before, I think I actually have a video about this where it's like, you're kind of fooling yourself if you think that TikTok is worse for American surveillance or censorship or security than Google is, right? Google is far worse probably. But TikTok ain't great. But I mean, if we're going to let China literally buy farmland in America, I feel like TikTok is maybe not as high on the priority list of things that we need to do to protect ourselves against China as a nation.
Money, I would think, available potentially to try to get a deal done, given the potential returns. And obviously it's not an insignificant effort to get the technology moved and rewrite a lot of that code. Do you think you're going to be a part of it?
We'll see. I think it's primarily technology driven, but we think it's a great business model.
All right. Well, you're now obviously in the sort of more of the private equity business, so to speak. We've had you on talking about a number of the different deals that you've done. Well, what's the sense of the environment right now, given rates haven't really moved very much in a favorable way?
Well, look, I've said on rates, my view is inflation's taking a little bit longer than people expected to come down. It will come down. Whether it comes down to 2% or 2.5%, 2 3/4, I think it'll be in that range. I expect the Fed will lower short-term rates, but I think treasuries, 10-year treasuries at 4.5% have that already priced into the market.
Yeah, I mean, we got a pretty hot CPI number just the other day. It certainly didn't seem to augur for lower rates anytime soon.
I think the Fed's being patient.
Yeah. And finally, there's been a lot of conversation recently about whether there's the gold that we think there is at Fort Knox. When we were sitting down here, you reminded me, you actually have a very specific personal experience to tell us. Is there the gold at Fort Knox?
The gold was there when I visited it. I hope nobody's moved it. I'm sure they haven't. I was the first Treasury Secretary to go there in, I think, over 50 years.
That is insane. How can you not check the vaults in 50 years? It's wild. He must have breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that the gold was still there.
Serious security protocols in place, obviously, to protect the gold that I can't talk about. But we went, we saw it, and if President Trump wants it to be audited, that's obviously something that can be easily done.
I think you went in 2017. By the way, I'm curious. You said you were the first Treasury Secretary to visit in 50 years. Why did you actually go see the gold?
We thought the gold stands for the U.S., although it's not backing the U.S. currency, it's obviously a major asset of the Treasury, and we thought it was something important to do.
Stephen, always appreciate it. Thanks for being a friend of the show. Stephen Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary. Guys, the gold is there. It's at Fort Knox. At least it was when he visited.
That's cool.
David, thanks. We'll talk in a little bit.
Well, that's actually good to know because I know people are like, oh, is the gold still at Fort Knox? But it's nice to know that it's still over there.